Hey guys, this is Philip. Just wanted to give you guys a quick tutorial on how I edited this image. I took this at the park the other day as we were on a walk. Up here in the top right hand corner you can see I shot this with the 85mm lens at 1.8. I shot this during the day. It was right around noon or just a bit before noon, so it was pretty bright outside. Shot this at 1/5000th of a second at ISO 100. So we were at the park, shot this with my Sony a7 III and the Sony 85mm 1.8 lens. This butterfly just happened to be right there by the flower, and snapped a few photos, and walked away with this image. So here's how I did it. Here's the original image, and as you can see, as I click back and forth between the images, things change just a little bit. Obviously between the two images, you can see up here in the top left hand corner there's some really bright leaves or flowers or something popping out here, foliage that's popping out that's super bright. The size of the butterfly wings change, and you'll see that things kind of are a little bit more dull. The saturation is brought down just a bit in the edited image, and then I also brought in some sun flare on the top right hand corner when I switched to this image, and I'll show you how I did all of that. Here is another image that I shot while I was out there. This one, the butterfly was actually on the flower. I really like this shot, but this one just seemed a little bit more interesting with the butterfly just approaching the flower. The original image, the flower is in focus on these front petals right here, but the butterfly must have been just a few centimeters behind that focal plane, so the butterfly is actually not completely in focus. So once you zoom out here, it's hard to tell right here, but when you zoom in you can really tell that. So what I did was I took the wings off of this butterfly in the other image, since that one is very sharp. I zoom into 200% here. You can actually see a lot more detail in the butterfly here versus the other one. So I took the wings off of the butterfly here and covered this one up. So let's get started. So what I'll do is I'll start with our original image here. I'm going to open this, edit in Photoshop. So what that's going to do is take this raw file, transfer it over to Photoshop, open it up as a raw file here. Let me open this as full screen. And I've got all the editing capabilities, and then once I'm done with it, once I save, it'll bring it back into Lightroom as if it was just the original image with the edits that I have here. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going up to my actions right here, and I've built a preset for the colors and things that I like during the spring season with all this foliage in the background. And I shot another image with the wildflowers in my daughter's boots and recorded my actions as I was doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play on this action. It's going to build out those selections and those colors that I had originally done, and it's going to bring in this overlay. It's a gray textured overlay. I'm going to go ahead and delete that for now so you can see how I do that. So with this image, you can see, I'm going to turn this other one off. I'm going to go into hue saturation, and what that is basically is under the adjustments panel here, you click hue and saturation, and it's going to put this adjustment layer over the original image. So anything that I do to this adjustment layer is going to affect the layers below it. So this is the original image, this is the adjustment layer, and when I adjust those things, it's going to affect everything underneath it. Okay, so I'm going to delete this one and go back into the one I have already done in my action, and you can do these however you want. I'm just going to show you how I've done it already. So in the reds, I've brought the reds up just slightly here. We'll go through the yellows. The yellows I brought up just a tiny bit, not a whole lot, because this image already has a lot of green and yellow built into it. As far as the greens, I brought those down quite a bit. So you can see when I bring that down, that brings the greens down quite a bit. And then the lightness is really what's going to affect it quite a bit. Is I brought those the green lightness down, just so it's not too overpowering. The blues I brought up just slightly to bring in some of the color in the flower, and then magenta is really where you're going to see a little bit of difference as well in that flower. I brought that down just a little bit, and then on top of that, I added selective color. Now this is the selective color adjustment layer. Once you click that, that's going to do the same thing, bring in that adjustment layer and affect everything that's underneath it. So when I go to the adjustment layer, you can see some of my adjustments here. In the reds, I brought the magenta down, yellow I've left, cyan I brought up, yellows I brought up a little bit more on the yellows and magenta. The greens I didn't touch because we'd already adjusted those a little bit. Cyan, adjusted a little bit more in the cyan or magenta. Blues, I brought the yellow down just a tad. And then magenta as well I brought up. Okay, so now that we've got these colors, you can see it brought out the color just slightly right in here and in here to make it very, very desaturated, very dull looking. So we'll work on that here in a second. So what I did want to show you is how I brought that other overlay image in. So I'm going to my overlay. I like to use this gray textured dark image, and basically that is something that I built in Photoshop with this color using a gradient, using the darker color and a lighter color, and using a radial gradient to go outward. And then I added some texture to it as well, just to give it some depth. So I'll bring that in, put it on top of my image, hit enter, and there it is. I know, it's a lot. So what we're going to do is go down to the overlay. We're going to select that, and then we're going to bring the opacity down to, I don't know, 80-ish, somewhere in there. Now this allows us to see everything in the image, but it gives it that depth. It gives it a little bit of color and a little bit of depth around the edges. When I turn it on and off, you can see that the center of the image, where our subject is, that's still fairly light, but it gives it some depth and color around the edges, and that's really what we want. Okay, I'm going to turn that off for now though, because I want to do something else first. So I'm going to go down to my background layer, click this little plus sign down here, which adds create new layer. Okay, now what I can do is use the stamp tool right here, and I want to make sure that the sample is sampling from the current layer and below. So what it's doing is when I am cloning things out, so mainly this area up here with the really bright leaves, it's going to use this layer, my new layer that I'm currently selected, and anything below that to sample and replace it with. So the only thing below it right now is our original image, which we haven't touched at all. We're just adding adjustments to it above it. So if anything happens that we don't like any of these adjustments, we can always turn these off and we have our original image. This is called a non-destructive editing sequence. So we're using this layer number 1, which is our new adjustment, or our new clone layer. So we're using the stamp tool, and I'm going to select using the Alt or Option key. I'm going to select something down here, and I'm just going to raise up the brush size. You can see the brush size right here. Bring it down just a little bit. Select Option, and we're just going to clone in some of this here. We want to make sure that we are sampling from different areas so that we don't get any multiple shapes. So you can see right here, I've got this line here, it goes dark, and then you see the same line right here, and you can see it starting up here again, which when you look at this image, it kind of gives it away that it's been photoshopped. So we want to resample from a different area, and we want to just continue doing this until we really get what we're kind of going after here. I'm actually going to make this image smaller. Now this is kind of hard. It can be kind of hard sometimes I can even sample from over here to just bring in some darkness. Now I've got that flower in there, so I want to bring some of that back in. And it's not perfect, but we've got something to kind of work with here a little bit. We don't want to make it too harsh distinction of shapes up here, because this is all in the background. It should be pretty blurry. Something like that. As you can see when I turn it off, that super bright leaf in the background is gone. Okay, so now we are going to, let's just check this out. You can still see, even though I've got this gray texture over it, you can still see the super desaturated areas up here. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at this super desaturated area right here. Now, when I turn that off, you can see that it's pretty blue in the background when I adjust that. So what we could do is we can use this mask layer and use our brush tool and make sure it's on black and just paint over this just slightly to bring that color back in. So what that is doing is it's telling this adjustment layer that we've created, the hue and saturation adjustment layer, it's telling, if I can select this, it's telling it to turn off the adjustment in these areas that I've painted on. Okay, so what we're doing is just putting that color back into it. Okay, so now we're going to bring that back in. Okay, so the next step is this image is still a little busy in the background. You can still see quite a few shapes, and it's just a little bit too much for my liking. I would love to have a little bit more depth of field, a little bit more bokeh, blur in the background, but at the time, I couldn't get that in this image. I could have brought a longer lens to give more compression, to give kind of throw things out in the background, or I could have had a different lens that's much more expensive that would give me that blur, but I didn't have it with me. And sometimes you're not always going to have that with you, or can't afford to have something like that with you all the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer and hit OK. Now we have two versions of our original image. The one on the bottom we really want to keep as much as possible. We want to keep that unedited. So this top layer, background copy, is what we're going to do right now. Now I'm going to use this lasso tool and draw a little line around the butterfly. Not perfect, but it'll do the job. Then go to Edit and Fill, where you're going to use the Content Aware Fill and hit OK. Now it's going to select everything around. The computer is looking at this and going to fill in this space. I'm going to deselect it. Butterfly is gone. I'm going to do the same thing with this flower and Edit, Fill, Content Aware, OK. Boom, gone. Deselect, gone. OK. Now what we're going to do is we are going to create the same kind of mask over this image. Actually, first, we're going to go up here to Gaussian Blur. So that's under Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And we're going to blur it down to the radius of about 31. This is a 24 megapixel image sensor, so I like to go around the same megapixels or a little bit more, so 31 is perfect for this image. Then we're going to go put a mask on it. So everything that is white in this box is going to show what is over here, right, in our image. So what we want to do is use our paintbrush, make sure it's on black, and we can paint black over this layer. And that basically is going to tell this layer, okay, I don't want you to show that part of the layer, show me what's underneath. Okay, so we're going to paint it out so we can see our flower and butterfly. Those are our subjects, right? Now this layer is the blurry layer. So I'm going to turn it on and off. You can see it's blurry, but our subject needs to be in focus, right? So we're painting the blurriness out and allowing the subject in the background to show through. through the next layer. Now, if I had left the butterfly in there on this layer, other than, we did the content aware fill, if I'd left it in there, we could have some fringing and some blurry edges, and that just wouldn't look good. So that's why we filled those in. Okay, now what we need to do is we still have the problem that these wings are not in focus. So I'm going to go back over to Lightroom. We're going to take this other image, edit in Photoshop. Okay, now what we want to do is use our quick selection tool, and we're going to select the butterfly wings. Layer via copy. Now we can move this layer out of the way. Oops. So this is the photo that we want to use. We've duplicated the wings, and now we can drag that layer of the wings over here. Boom. Now we have two weird butterflies. We can hit our Command T to transform for a free transform image, and then move it over here on top of our butterfly. I'm going to right click and hit distort. This will allow us to move it around just slightly wherever we want it to, just so we can cover up this butterfly wing. Okay, so now we've got that kind of adjusted to the same angle as where our butterfly is in the original photo, right? So I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to turn that on and off so we can see, yep, that's about where we want it. Okay, I'm going to zoom in, and there's some harsh edges around the body of the butterfly. So I'm going to hit the mask, use my paintbrush tool, lower the size of that, and I'm just going to paint out the body just a little bit. Okay, now we've got that body in there. Butterfly wings look good. We should be good to go. Now, I wanted to add a little bit more depth to it by adding some light and some darkness to add some contrast. Now, so we're going to go up here, and we're going to create a new layer above our vignette, our gradient vignette. I'm going to hit the Alt or Option key and select a very bright color on the butterfly wings, and we're going to bring it all the way up so we get some similar color in the image. I'm going to make this image smaller. Now on this top layer, there's nothing going on here yet, but we're going to add some of that sun flare in. With the gradient tool on the radius, it looks okay. I want to bring this in a little bit closer. Maybe a little bit more. There we go, something like that. And then I like to use the screen and then bring that opacity down just slightly. And you can kind of adjust it to where you like it. And then I'm going to create another layer on top of that. And this one's going to be our dark layer. So I'm going to hit the Option or Alt key and select a very dark color in the bottom and do, actually, no, I'm going to do this one is the linear gradient. So that creates just a straight wall of gradient down here. So that looks okay. I'm going to bring it in a little bit closer. And we'll do the multiply. So that just kind of multiplies the color on top of each other. So that gives it a little bit of depth. I'm going to actually bring that one down just a little bit as well, the opacity down, because that's a little bit too much at 100%. Right there. So now we can turn that on and off and see that that gives us some pretty good depth over there in the corner. The light also does the same, but just the opposite direction. I'm going to bring the opacity down just slightly there, and that gives it some warmth over there on that side. Now we are done with this image. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And what that's going to do is bring it back into Lightroom. Okay, so we brought it back into Lightroom. So now we can make some more adjustments to it. You can leave it as is. Sometimes I like to do a few more adjustments, either warm it up or adjust a few things in here that might be a little bit easier to adjust versus Photoshop. The main things that you would want to adjust in here is clarity, if you want to do that, and texture. And then also the sharpness. I like to do my sharpness in Lightroom, so I like to bring it up to, I don't know, about 60% on the amount. Radius, I like to go all the way up, and then detail, right in the middle, about 50. And then here's a super neat trick, is using the masking tool in sharpening. So hit your Alt or Option key. As you do this, as you bring it down, it'll only sharpen those parts that are in white. So you bring it all the way up, and there's not very much left to sharpen. So I like to do it about right there. 70 is good for this image. So it's only going to sharpen those edges that are in white, shown right here. Now I'm going to release the Option key, and that's what's going to be sharpened by this sharpening tool right here. And there we go. We've got a really nice looking image. It's very simple. It's very plain, but there's a lot of techniques and a lot of tools that we've used in this image that you can use in other images as well. So the sharpening, the masking, the content-aware fill, these gradients that we've used on the edges, the stamping tool, all of these things are non-destructive. So if we wanted to go back and edit that image again, we can edit those things without losing our image or losing that data in the image. So these are some really neat tips and really neat tricks that you can use in almost any image that you're using to really make it pop and really make it work for what you want to do. Thanks so much, guys, for watching this. Please hit subscribe and like this video. Give me a comment if you'd like to see more, or if you have any questions about certain tips and tricks, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.